I'll talk about some specific things that we passed in a moment, but as you heard and certainly would expect, the big issue for us and the biggest challenge for us legislators, as well as, of course, the governor's office, was the budget. It was and still remains some difficult, very challenging times. And quite frankly, that the budget discussion is kind of what took all the oxygen out of the room for the work that we were trying to do. Some of the early figures that you heard were that based on projected revenue, we were going to have to reduce our budget by 14%. Now, you may remember, to put this in context, the governor had asked last August and September that all agencies submit a budget with 4 to 6% reduction for the upcoming 2021 budget. That, of course, created some angst with many of our agencies doing the best they can with the funds they have. And here they were being asked to reduce by 4 to 6%. And then came the real shocker in March, when the numbers started to come in, and the economists that were advising us were telling us we may need to look at a 14% reduction. The good news from that is that based on the actual revenue that we have collected as a state, wound up where we had a budget, proposed budget for 2021 that we're looking at really in the 8 to 10% reduction range. So a lot of reduction, a lot's being asked of agencies to make do with less. But at the same time, it's not as bad as the 14% that we thought we were going to be facing. So that's a little bit about the budget. I do have some numbers I'll share that are specific to Macon and Middle Georgia a little bit later in my remarks. But I would tell you that the good news is that our sales tax, really our revenue for the state, has remained fairly steady. Our income tax has remained fairly steady. That is admittedly in large part due to the CARES Act and the funding that's come from the federal government. Not exclusively, because the fundamentals of our economy are good, but also one last comment on the economics, and that is there were concerns with the governor's office going into this year, back in the fall, that caused the request for a reduction in the budget, based just on some odd economic data that we were seeing. It was some inexplicable revenue loss, and we sort of worked past all of that. And so we're headed into, obviously, we have the budget for 2021, and then we'll go back in session for January of 21, and we'll work through an amended budget for 21, and then working on the 2022 budget. Let me talk a little bit about some of the legislation that we passed and some of the things that I worked on, if I could. One of the things that I put a lot of time into this year was I authored Senate Bill 359, which was the Georgia COVID-19 Pandemic Business Safety Act. And the thought behind the legislation that I wrote and got passed out of the Senate was to provide some immunity to businesses from, in essence, frivolous lawsuits that are feared to be filed. I'll tell you, one of the things that I thought about and what caused me to work on this was I'd heard that there was a billboard in California from a plaintiff's lawyer that was asking to call him if you contracted COVID for potentially suing someone and suing a business. By the time I got the bill to the Senate, there was a billboard, I was told, in Augusta. So the concern of potential litigation coming for businesses was what prompted that. We passed that version out of the Senate. It went to the House. The House had their version. Their version was, as you might expect for me to say, was not as good as I thought the Senate version was. But the House version passed, and it does provide some protection for businesses. The main driver behind it was, and what my objective was, to give businesses some comfort, and quite frankly, all of our society, if you will, some comfort that going forward, companies could open their doors and reopen their businesses without the fear of having to defend against lawsuits. And quite frankly, we're in unprecedented times. And I think the further we get away from that, sometimes it's easy to forget just how challenging the times were, um, and how we were all making do. But some other pieces of legislation, Yvonne, if I can, and Julia, just
Yes.
maybe mention. So beyond the budget, we had some legislation that was what we call the marketplace facilitator legislation, which calls for sales tax to be paid by marketplace facilitators. And what we found in looking at revenue sources is that you had the Amazons of the world, and not specifically them, but online sales that were not required, or there was an ambiguity as to whether or not they were required to collect sales tax on sales in Georgia, which put them at a competitive advantage over our brick and mortar businesses and mom and pop businesses and local businesses that have a physical presence. And we thought, that's not fair. And so to level that playing field, we passed the sales tax and marketplace facilitator legislation. One of the other things that one of my colleagues, Senator Chuck Hufstetler, worked on very hard, and we passed out of the Senate, that ultimately came out in conjunction with House Bill 888, which is surprise billing. And, hopefully you haven't personally experienced this, but a lot of folks have, and you probably have family members who have experienced having to go to the hospital, and then you come home and you have a bill that is truly a surprise, and you have fees and costs and perhaps even providers that you had no reason to anticipate. And so the bill that we passed this year includes a system of arbitration to resolve payment disputes between the health insurer, the provider, and the facility, as well as establish insurer payment measures related to non-participating providers for emergency and even non-emergency services. So that's one of the things that we as legislators heard a lot from folks about of the unfairness of the surprise billing. One of the things that I also worked on and authored and passed the bill this year, which was Senate Bill 373, which was a corollary to some legislation I passed 2 years ago. But it leveled the playing field, if you will, between for-profit businesses and nonprofits with regard to the standard for holding an officer and a director of the company liable for their service on the board. And what we found when the law was changed a few years ago, the nonprofits were not included. And we were learning of situations where a lot of really good charitable organizations were finding it difficult to get people to serve on their board of directors because, due to a Georgia Supreme Court decision that came out a few years ago, the potential liability for them and their service on that board increased. And so this put it back at the same standard where it had been for years before that Supreme Court decision, and also put it on par with other businesses. So that is very good legislation to help our charities and nonprofits be able to seek and get the service of folks to serve on their boards and provide guidance that way. There's another bill that I passed, Senate Bill 451, which again was trying to correct an issue related to some legal principles that came out of the Court of Appeals decision that in essence voided warranties in the state of Georgia beyond anything that was 8 years. So if you purchased a 20-year warranty on your roof because of that Court of Appeals decision, it didn't matter that you paid for that or bought it. It only could have an 8-year life beyond the point of the installation of the product in the example of the roof. So this allows us to go back and allows you and also the state of Georgia to have and receive the benefit of whatever that warranty was that had been purchased. Some other legislation that I'd worked on that I'm particularly passionate about, and it was the Georgia Broadband Opportunity Act, and that was Senate Bill. I had my Senate version. The House had a substantially similar version as well, and the House bill is ultimately what passed of House Bill 244, but the language was identical to what was proposed later in the session by the Senate side. And it, in essence, requires electric membership corporations to comply with rates, fees, and terms and conditions related to pole attachment fees. And this is where there was a difference in the law, the way it had been for some time, with regard to what EMCs can charge to attach to their poles to RIDE to provide, in the example here, broadband service. And in certain circumstances, the rates were such that it was operating as an impediment for companies to be able to provide and get the broadband deployed to other areas. This is something that we're increasingly learning, and most folks are becoming aware of broadband and internet service is not a luxury. It's not something you want to have. It's something you have to have. And businesses have certainly understood this. And I know the Chamber has been a great voice for making that argument that that internet service and good broadband service is necessary to enable us to not only attract new businesses and economic development here to our area as well as any area, but also to maintain the businesses that we have. And so that's been one of the things that I've worked on that I hope will truly move the needle in the right direction so that we can have greater broadband deployment out in rural Georgia. I'm really privileged to represent a district that has a vast difference of areas. I've got some areas of my district that are extremely rural, where I've had some constituents tell me that they cannot even get the satellite version of internet connectivity. And then I have some, of course, that have high-speed connectivity. And so it's something that the legislature has, I think, seized on. There's always different opinions on how to best accomplish it. But I think that this is one of those things that's truly going to move the needle and help move things in the right direction. Let's see, Ron, I don't want to just drone on about things we did this past year. I know you said you had some questions.
Yes, thank you so much.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And
well, it's been very enlightening. I love that you brought out some of these bills that were so important. We particularly got behind the 359 bill, and that was important for us to really sustain this litigation atmosphere and make sure that businesses were going to be protected. But you've done such a great job, Senator, of outlining so many pro-business initiatives that we would have never been able to monitor all of those kind of pop-ups as they came up, and especially in the light of COVID, had you not been having your eye on the ground and really looking for these opportunities to help make reform happen. So we congratulate you and the entire delegation for that teammanship to really protect us in these very difficult times. So yes, we have some questions that are kind of diverse, but certainly on the minds of our business leaders. And I'll start with one that's really been very important for Macon-Bibb, and that is the OLOST legislation potential. And the question from one of our members is, what is the update of the state statute for OLOST?
Sure, thank you, and thanks for that question, because that's something that I have devoted a good bit of time, as well as other members of the delegation. And Yvonne, you very appropriately referenced our Macon-Bibb delegation. I want to give a shout out and thank all of those members that we've got. There are 3 of us in the Senate that are part of the Macon-Bibb delegation. I think we've got 5 in the House, and it is such a privilege to get to work with the delegation that we have. We, of course, have different opinions on what the solutions to certain problems are. But I can say without exception that we have a great working relationship. I'm privileged to chair the delegation, and that's something they allow me to do. And I appreciate their work, all the House and all the Senate members, and the spirit and attitude that they bring when we talk about things, truly trying to find what's best for Macon-Bibb or what's best for Middle Georgia. And to that, I want to thank the Chamber in leading in some ways for us looking at things regionally. Vaughn, I know you have been a champion of that, and that truly is the attitude that I think that we need to have to make sure that we're all working collaboratively. And I think our local delegation has that view on things. But specifically with regard to OLOST, and let me just maybe put a little context on that for folks that may not know. So OLOST stands for Other Local Option Sales Tax, and it is a specific statute that is designed for consolidated governments like we are now and have been for a few years to pass an additional loss. There are different loss. There are e-loss, regular loss and all different ones that are authorized by statute. And regardless of what loss you're talking about, including the O-loss, by state law, the loss, if the local area passes it, whatever sales tax revenue is created by that goes to reduce property tax burden. So whatever that collection is, then the local government is required to reduce the millage rate for an equal amount so that whatever the revenue produced is equals an amount of property tax reduction. I am in favor of that principle. It's a good law, and any way that we can look for reducing the burden of property tax on property tax owners, and we're talking mainly homeowners here. Any way we can do that that is reasonably calculated and rational, we need to look at doing that. So I am in favor of loss in general. I'm specifically in favor of O-loss and this additional statute that enables consolidated governments. So so what we have worked on, a number of folks have worked on over the last few years, is looking at O-loss, looking at ways, is this something that would be good for making BIB? Is this something that our local leaders want? And I particularly think that I need to be deferential to our local leaders when it comes to local issues. This is not a purely local issue because it requires state legislation. But a large part of this needs to come from and the direction being given by our local leaders. And I know a lot of folks are in favor of this. So I think the status of right now is there was no legislation passed this year. And maybe one of the things I should say is that the O-loss, from a procedural standpoint, winds up being treated much like local legislation. And so it requires, in some circumstances, either a majority or sometimes a complete consensus in each in each chamber's committee that deals with local legislation. In the Senate, we've got our local legislation committee, and as they have in the House. And so I say all that to say that it requires the local delegation members to be in favor of this. And there's been some diverse opinions, and quite frankly, a lack of total agreement on that has forestalled or made us not be able to further the O-loss legislation for making BIB for the past 2 years. But I think that's something that we will look at again in 2021. And I'm sure the other members of the delegation will be looking to take direction and seek the input and opinions from our local leaders as to what they think.
Well, thank you. You've outlined what our homework is, and it looks like that the chamber would be a great opportunity to monitor that, along with the partnership of our local delegation, as well as the new administration that will be coming in January of 2021 for the local government. So we've been in this environment of COVID now for about 5 to 6 months, and there's been many state orders, executive orders that have helped protect the state, to advance the state, to reopen, to help communities, to balance with healthcare premises. What is your thoughts about where we are now with our current executive order, and kind of what are the things that are really being looked at to stay safe, to be productive, but also to be mindful of the peaks that Georgia is experiencing in the cases of COVID?
Yvonne, thank you for that. And that's such a great question. It's something that's on everyone's mind, either consciously or subconsciously, given sort of the world we live in today. As you alluded to, there's actually been a series of executive orders that started on March the 14th when Governor Kemp issued the first executive order declaring a public health emergency for our entire state. It outlines some basic strategies to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, and it also importantly opened up resources to assist with statewide response. Since then, that order, I think, as most everybody knows, has been renewed several times. The typical orders under the statute as initially enacted by the governor and under the Constitution are valid for 30 days and require further action by the governor. And so that explains in part why you've seen this renewal of the executive order, but also some tweaking and changing. And I want to take just a moment and thank our governor, thank Governor Kemp for his very measured approach in dealing with this issue. And one of the things he's done that I think he's now getting applauded for in some ways, where initially he was not, is making the very important and weighty decisions that he has had to make on behalf of our state, our families, our children, understanding that, of course, the health issue and concerns are first, but let's remember there are other concerns and other factors that go into that decision-making process. One of which, of course, you hear him talk about is what is this doing to the livelihoods of Georgians and what his decisions will do to the livelihoods of Georgians. And that includes the business community, business owners, small businesses, some people of whom have worked their entire life to build up a business that they're facing the total destruction of that. And so he's been very sensitive to and very thoughtful in the approach to think about that rather than just having a decision that's driven by nothing but a medical decision or a medical concern. So we've seen these subsequent orders from the governor come out, which included things that provided directions about overnight summer camps. It also transferred funds from our rainy day fund, which again, I want to thank Governor Kemp and also Governor Deal for the work that was done so that we built up our rainy day funds. It was about $2.5 billion as of February when we started looking at this and realizing we might need to tap into that. And I'm glad that we had that state savings bank account, if you will. The orders have also provided guidance in accordance with recommendations from the CDC, which we have all seen can change on a weekly, if not even more frequent basis. But we've also had direction on the Department of Public Health and other national healthcare experts. The most recent executive order issued by the governor was just a few days ago on August the 15th. And it allowed cities to create their own local option face covering requirement if they meet certain health-related metrics. And that, as I recall, related to the number of positive test results relative to the population. However, under this last order issued 6 days ago, it's not mandatory that local governments issue local option face covering requirements, but it just provides them with that option. This executive order also recommends, quite frankly, some real common sense methods to help keep everyone safe and healthy, including practicing social distancing, basic hygiene, washing your hands. And it may sound like we're hearing that message a lot, but it's interesting. I don't think we can overemphasize that because the experts, whether you're watching the national experts or you're listening to our local trusted health officials, there's a few basic things that everybody keeps saying we need to do. And we just need to keep reminding ourselves and each other and make sure that businesses do what they can to remind their decision makers to do these basic things for the public safety of all of us.
Well, thank you for that. And I think everyone in Macon Bibb is really being conscious about the fact that even as we go through our spikes, there is a personal responsibility to take on those measures and be responsive. So I agree with you totally that we have to take this as part of our ownership and the healthcare opportunities we have going forward to preserve that and to create the environments for safety. We have long had a desire to expand our Middle Georgia Regional Airport runway extension. That's been on a legislative agenda for many years. It's been supported regionally with other partners. I know you have been particularly a leader in finding avenues for us to be advancing that agenda, to have it as a high priority for the state's ability to be strategic. What can we expect in 2021 to be another milestone that we may achieve with this pursuit?
Well, Yvonne, thank you for that. And that is something that I've been passionate about. I happen to believe that, like many of you do, and many of our local leaders, that our airport is an unmined gem, if you will, and really can provide some economic benefits in many ways that can set aside Middle Georgia. That by using that basic infrastructure for economic development in ways that are very unique to, quite frankly, all other areas in the state. It's a great airport, and I'm happy to see that the commercial service, the success that it has had, and I appreciate your comments, Yvonne. Yes, I did work hard, as well as many others, to secure funding at the state level, and that was included in the 2020 amended budget in an amount of $3 million for the expansion. So that was state money that we were able to get put in the budget for that expansion. It's a little hard to predict the future
Exactly.
on this one in particular, and this is one that really stings a little bit when you think about the economic uncertainties, not just at the state level or the local level, but also the federal level. But I know you, Yvonne, and many others with the chamber have really led on this issue. You recognize the value that the airport not only brings, but also we can think just in the last 12 months of some of the announcements that have been made about businesses coming that, quite frankly, are coming because of the airport and their location close to the airport and their ability to expand Middle Georgia's aviation business footprint is because of that airport. And so we do need this extension of the runway, and I think it will happen. I want to try to manage all of our and my expectations just based on these very difficult budgetary times. I don't have any insight on what's going on with the funds that are necessary from the federal level. I know Mayor Robert Rickert has worked hard on this, as well as other members of our commission and other members of the local delegation. And so thank you for the question. I would say probably the status is we did all we could and, quite frankly, got what we needed in this last budget round for the amended 2020 budget. And if we can just keep that momentum going, I think we're going to get there, and we're going to see businesses come to Macon because of the saturation in the areas of Atlanta and elsewhere. We're just a logical spot for it. And the kind of jobs that come that are brought by this economic opportunity are great paying jobs, companies that have a long-term presence and make substantial investments in their infrastructure here. And I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you for getting to first base, and we're going to have a home run as we continue to move forward. And I really believe that you're right on with the Freight Logistics Commission, and all of the work they'll be doing. We'll be right with them in partnership to look for new funding sources to support this region. I want to switch to small business for just a minute. We've been, as chambers, we have been distressed and left out of the CARES Act as a 501c6 organization, and yet we serve hundreds of small businesses. We have been innovative here at the Greater Macon Chamber, but we've been very, very vocal at the federal level about making sure the next package includes 501c6 organizations, and that we will be given the PPP status for funding sources. But we also know there's a lot of CARES Act money coming through the state. What do you see as the next wave of funding, and where do you think the priorities will continue to be outside of healthcare relief and others to support the funding needed around the state with the next CARES Act funding?
Well, you're right. The CARES Act has been critical to not just Georgia's economy or Macon's economy, but it has been critical on a national level. The Paycheck Protection Program, which was established by the CARES Act, as you know, and most folks listening know, was implemented or is implemented by the SBA, and it provides small businesses with funds of up to 8 weeks for payroll costs. But there's a few other programs I want to also mention just to make sure that your members Yvonne, maybe are aware of it because of there's some interest, and then I want to give you some maybe local data if I can. The another avenue, in addition to the Paycheck Protection Program, which prioritized by authorizing $659 billion toward job retention, another avenue available to businesses are economic injury disaster loans, EIDLs. And these are designed to provide economic relief to businesses that are currently experiencing temporary loss of revenue. These EIDL proceeds can be used to cover a wide array of normal operating expenses such as healthcare benefits, rent, utilities, and also fixed debt payments. So the SBA resumed accepting new EIDL applications on June 15th, just a couple of months ago, to all qualified small businesses, including U.S. agricultural businesses. So that's one thing I want our folks to know about. Another one is, which is an option made available by the SBA, are express bridge loans. These loans allow small businesses who currently have a business relationship with an SBA Express lender to access up to $25,000 very quickly. The loans can provide vital economic support to small businesses and help them overcome temporary loss of revenue that a lot of folks are suffering. And it can be used to bridge the gap while applying for the direct SBA economic injury disaster loans that we talked about. So if a small business has an urgent need for cash while waiting on a decision for the disbursement from economic injury disaster loan, they may qualify for this. And I would encourage any business that continues to feel the financial hardships as a result of COVID-19 to visit the SBA's website for more information. Exactly where the federal government is going to take this in the future, I guess, is anybody's guess. That's above my pay grade, so to speak. But let me give you some details about what it has meant for and what the legislation has meant for Georgia so far. The federal stimulus, in Middle Georgia in particular, the federal stimulus and enhanced unemployment, which was the $600 extra from the feds, is keeping our economy, quite frankly, propped up. As a result, the state only missed our fiscal year 2020 budget by $353 million, which is a lot. That's not something we can just shake off or ignore, but we thought we were going to miss it by $1 billion. Yeah, it would be $1 billion. So 353 million looks good compared to an anticipated or a feared $1 billion loss. We are actually trending positive by 17% through July. The August numbers also are holding strong so far, and it's led by income tax withholdings, TAVT. So that means people are still continuing to buy cars again, and with a steady sales tax, so that means folks are still shopping. So those business fundamentals are good. The concern, of course, that we all have is how much of that, we all, I think, agree that that's in large part due to the economic stimulus that came from this CARES Act. So what happens when that's curtailed or isn't provided anymore? The hope is that as that curve goes down, that the curve on the business recovery comes up, which I know that we're seeing as well. I saw some good headlines in the Macon Telegraph this morning about jobless claims going down and the number of jobs going up, jobs being fulfilled. That doesn't mean that everybody is out of the woods, and it doesn't mean that we don't have businesses hurting. We've still got particularly hotels and motels are substantially off by approximately 1/3. The other area of revenue that's down for us, Yvonne, is motor fuel tax, as you might expect, is down because of the less decrease in travel. But finally, if I could give you these numbers to show you the impact of the CARES Act on us locally, that Macon-Bibb particularly has received a lot of federal support. Macon medical providers have received $59.5 million in CARES Act funding. And the biggest of that, of course, is the medical center at $35 million. Mercer University has received $5.2 million. Middle Georgia State University has received $5.9 million. Wesleyan College, $587,000. Bibb County Schools have received $10.6 million. And so the Bibb County Schools had over $30 million in revenue at the end of FY 2019. So their previous strong fiscal management, we should applaud. We should thank them for that. We should thank the leadership that directed that we had, in fact, that amount in reserves is going to definitely help us through the lean times. So the combination of good fiscal management there, plus the roughly $10.5 million from the CARES Act, hopefully will mean that on a particularly local level, that we're doing okay. That doesn't mean that there aren't people hurting, and that doesn't mean that there's not uncertainty in the future. But again, I'm maybe the eternal optimist, but I truly think we've seen the worst of this, and we're just going to have to manage through the recovery as we head into the fall.
Well, thank you for that. That's a really strong numbers, and it looks like that we're on the right path towards making sure we're deploying the funds in the areas of most need. And we certainly want to just raise our hand out there that the Greater Macon Chamber will continue to be a resource for small businesses as we try to maneuver their ability to recover with their connection and membership and their engagement with resources. So it's been a great dialogue. Just help us out with a discussion, sort of a preview of what we will see for the 2021 session.
Oh gosh, I wish I had a crystal ball. I might could answer that question. It is hard to say. After all, none of us had any idea of what our priorities would be, or how quickly they would shift as COVID-19 hit, and we tried to formulate a response to that when we all started in January this past year. I do think, though, that the biggest continuing issue and challenge that we will have for the state is the budget. We have, by constitutional requirement, we have to have a balanced budget. And I think personally, as someone who's conservative and certainly from an economic fiscal policy, thank goodness we do have to have a balanced budget. It forces us to make prudent, thoughtful, hopefully smart decisions in the moment about how we spend state revenue, rather than running the risk of leveraging our state and doing things that can impair bond ratings and things like that. So that forces us to make those hard decisions. And so I think that's going to continue to be a big challenge. I think by the time we resume the legislature in January and February of 2021, we're going to be looking at real numbers. We'll know by February really what the calendar year of 2020 looked like. And that will drive a lot of the decision making going forward, which is a lot about setting priorities for how we spend the state's revenue. I think COVID-19 has also probably exposed a few areas where legislation might be necessary to include virtual education for our students, including broadband expansion. If anyone ever doubted the need and the necessity for having broadband out to all of Georgia as best we can and provide all the incentives to companies that want to provide those services. If you didn't understand it, if you have a child in school, you certainly get it now with what we've had to do transitioning to virtual learning. And I think you're going to see some renewed efforts, and I've got some ideas and some potential legislation I'm working on, again, for the purpose of trying to incentivize businesses, reduce barriers to entry so that companies that want to further expand broadband out into Georgia, and we're mostly talking about rural Georgia, because a lot of the more concentrated areas, the business model works so that they can have an economic return by investing in the infrastructure. But we've got to make sure that particularly the children that are now relegated to only virtual learning can continue to learn. There's just few things more important than that. And I think you're going to see a renewed effort and some real focus on what are the best solutions we can do to make sure that not only are we getting through this crisis right now, but are better prepared for the next one. And hopefully there's not one for a long time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a medical crisis. It could be something else that jeopardizes our ability to sort of conduct life the way we normally do. In the interim, I'll mention there are some things going on sort of between now and January, Vaughn, and those are study committees.
Right.
In the Senate, we passed, I think, created legislation for 4 or 5 study committees. And those are off-season study committees. The House has some of theirs, and we have some that we have every year. One of those study committees, I authored the legislation for, and I will chair it. And it's a Senate study committee on COAMs, the coin-operated amusement machines, that is a subject of a lot of press from time to time. It's regulated, if you will, highly with some high connectivity with the Georgia Lottery as of some legislation that was passed about 4 years ago. But through the study committee that I'm chairing, we're going to look at whether or not and what, if any additional regulations need to be imposed, and looking at the model and how do we make sure that it's a good, fair model for everybody involved. And so that's just one of the things. And there are other study committees that will be going on looking at different things as well. So that's the kind of transition between 2020 and 2021. And that's probably about as good of a job as I can do on trying to predict 2021. And who knows if I've kind of identified the issues. I guess time will only tell of what we do when we get back.
Well, thank you. We certainly have a day-to-day way to look at where conditions will land and what we'll be experiencing. I just want to thank you so much for your leadership, Senator Kennedy, and the wonderful time you've spent with us this morning in a very, very busy schedule, demanding lots of different initiatives of your thought. We want to welcome you and the delegation to the Macon Matters event. We are planning it for October the 15th at the Walnut Creek Shooting Preserve, socially distancing appropriate. But hopefully we'll get to see you in person, because the last time I got to see you was at the legislative dinner right before we had to shut down for the COVID. So we look forward to that opportunity. I also want to explain to the membership that we're very pleased that we're going to have the Administrator Carranza from the SBA National Office to come to visit in Macon next Friday. She's going to make a special trip to Middle Georgia with the SBA delegates, and this is the first time she's been to Macon, so we're very happy to host her as the welcoming committee through the chamber. That'll be very exciting. We look forward to next week's town hall with our school update of all the things that are being considered for a safe reopening and welcoming our students back to the environment of learning, which will be very important with Dr. Jones. I just want to say that the community is very proud to be partnering for success. And if you're in Macon, please be advised that we wish for you to wear your mask. Thank you and have a great weekend. Be safe.
Thank you.